Maserati has been a well-renowned Italian brand famous for their racing heritage for years. But as is the case with most businesses, if you want to make money, it helps to have a little bit of sales volume, which was the idea behind this, the first mid-size sedan Maserati since the 1990s, the Maserati Ghibli. The Maserati Ghibli had gone through two separate generations before. It started out in the early 1970s as a beautiful Italian V8 2+2 Grand Tourer, and then came back as yet another version of the Biturbo, which was a mid-size car in the early 1990s, late 1980s that Maserati thought they could make 8 million versions of without people noticing that it was the exact same car. And of course, the Ghibli fell under that umbrella of models. In the early 2010s, Maserati decided that they could make more cars if they sold a mid-size sedan. And that was the Ghibli, the current Ghibli, which went on sale in 2014 and went out of production basically yesterday. And to Maserati's credit, and the Ghibli as well, it was one of, if not the best-selling model that the company had until the Levante came along, which was their first crossover SUV. But this is a bad car. It is an insult to the brand. It is an insult to the entire country of Italy. It's awful. Not the styling, however. This is an absolutely beautiful car. It has all the right curves. It has all the right design elements to look like a sleek, Italian, expensive four-door car. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. It's below the skin and inside the car, and when you drive it, where all of its unfortunate shortcomings make themselves obviously apparent. So with that being said, let's take a review type tour of the Maserati Ghibli and speculate on whether these things, after having suffered massive depreciation, whether they're even worth $20,000, which is about where they transact these days. Is it even worth $20,000? I would argue it's not, but let's get on with the tour. Around the back, you can see this 2014 Ghibli is badged as a Q4, which means it is the all-wheel drive version, which came with the upgraded V6 engine that in this earlier model produced 404 horsepower. Again, around the back you look, this thing is absolutely gorgeous, but I digress. Let's have a look at the trunk area here. You have a manual trunk lid, which again, this car is 11 years old. Not the biggest deal, but in a Maserati, you could be led to expect something a bit more luxurious than something you just slam shut and doesn't, you know, it's a manual trunk lid, not a big deal. So I look inside and I see, ooh, Maserati genuine accessories. Is it an OBD2 reader or a tool hook? That is a battery tender that is Maserati branded, and I'm sure it wasn't just a basic battery tender that costed Maserati $1 per unit that they plastered their name on, because it does feel like really high quality stuff right here. It's nice to have because if you have a Maserati Ghibli, you're probably gonna have a lot of other multi-million-dollar Italian cars in a warehouse. So when you're not using the Ghibli and you're using your Ferrari F40 instead, you're gonna wanna be able to park this car on the charger, or what is more likely is you won't wanna drive this car at all because it's bad. So you'll have it plugged into this battery charger for when you inevitably decide that you've had enough and you want to get rid of it. And what you have in here is just a basic trunk area, not all that special. It's big enough, it's wide enough, the opening is large enough for most people, it should be fine. And on the right over there, you have a 12-volt cigarette style charging outlet and a little storage net. So in terms of the trunk area itself, it's fine. And now we are going to segue into the interior of the Maserati, and I have to warn you all, be ready for the most obnoxious red you've ever seen. Stepping in the back of the Maserati Ghibli, and yeah, this is the most obnoxiously red interior I've seen in my entire life. It is lipstick red. It's so loud. And I have to say, absolutely hideous. Another thing is that this leather really shows its age with time. So the front seat right here, the driver's seat, has a lot of creases. Everywhere you look, there's creases, there's marks. So maybe when it was brand new, it looked a little bit better. Maybe it's the fact that there's so many creases everywhere you look on the seats. I don't know. This is the most obnoxiously red I've ever laid my eyes upon. It's horrific. This passenger seat is pretty much where I would sit. I'm 6'3", and this seat, as a result, is moved quite far back. For a car of this size, I think this was about 5 Series size back in the day, and it's not horrible when it comes to that. My knees are obviously touching the seat in front of me. I don't have that much foot room beneath the seat, and if I sit back, my head touches. It's barely passable for someone of my height. You could sit back here for not super long journeys. It's okay, it's fine, but that's kind of what you'd expect for something of this size. In the center here, there is a high quality center armrest area. A couple little cup holders here, which are lined in that hideous red once again, and this has got to be the cheapest cup holder lid I have ever felt. I get the distinct impression that I wouldn't have to try that hard at all to just break this off. I mean, it's not high quality. That's very flimsy, very lightweight, very plasticky, not nice feeling. And when it comes to interior quality, here we go, it's bad. It's just not good for a car with a Maserati badge, in my opinion. So take this door panel, for instance. I have this stitched leather door panel, which looks nice. Doesn't feel all that great, but that could honestly just be wear with time. You can find some cheap plastic. You don't have to look very hard. Mostly at the bottom of the door panel, it feels quite cheap and plasticky. And then you have this carbon fiber trim right here, which is fine, reasonable. It's kind of what you'd expect for a Maserati to have. And that's okay. The door panel overall is okay until you arrive at the very obviously Chrysler window switchgear back here. That is so clearly something that you'd also find in a Chrysler Pacifica or a Jeep Cherokee, and it's here. And then what is also here are these vast panel gaps. Doug DeMuro famously did a YouTube video where he stuck a toothpaste tube in one of these panel gaps, and what I'm going to do is take my glasses, which don't quite fit back here actually. They will fit up front, so we'll do that in a second. One more thing is you have an Alcantara lined headliner, which is beautiful and feels very nice actually. So that is probably the only thing about this interior that I like. So with that being said, let's move up front. Up front in the Maserati Ghibli is where a lot of the problems get worse. Once again, you're greeted by these obnoxiously red seats that I can't get used to. If you're bothered by the seats, and I suggest you are if you are blessed with the gift of sight, then you can obviously find different colored seats. You can probably get black seats for this car. Beige seats, I'm sure, are available. So I say a lot of the problems get worse. And I direct your attention to this panel gap at the back of the front door. And now I'm going to take my glasses off, and they fit. They fit in the panel gap. That's the best thing that I have to use right now. They fit in the panel gap completely folded up. Absolutely insane. I mean, some engineer put this car together, put the first prototype together and thought, yeah, that's fine. That panel gap, that's fine. Nobody's going to notice. Nobody's going to notice because you're going to be looking ahead. You're not going to be looking at the panel gap here. No one's going to notice that. Everyone noticed, by the way, Maserati. In the center here, you have more carbon fiber trim, which is fine, I guess. Back here, you have a large storage area, which is also fine. And then you have this automatic gear selector. This car is 8-speed automatic only, and it is an awful, awful gear selector. I find it so difficult to use. It's sort of a half electronic and half mechanical gear selector, which sounds complicated, but here's what I mean. Moving it from park to drive is a longer distance than moving it from park to reverse, just like what you'd expect in a traditional old school mechanical automatic gear selector. but it behaves electronically. Once you move it from park to drive, it returns back to the center position, which means it is an electronic gear selector, but it's engineered to sort of feel like a mechanical gear selector. But the problem with that is it's a bit more difficult than it needs to be to really feel out the gears, if that makes sense. I'm always finding it that I'm putting it in the complete wrong gear instead of the gear that I want. So if I'm trying to put it in reverse, I'll always pull too far and then put it into neutral, and vice versa with every gear. I find this gear selector very frustrating to use. It also sometimes just doesn't work the way you want it to. It's a bit delayed when you get your foot on the brake. I don't understand why they didn't just do a traditional electronic gear selector where you pull it towards you for drive, push it away for reverse, and then there's a button for park. No, it's here and it's just as bad to use as you would expect. But one thing that is redeemable about this car is that you have these massive shift paddles on the steering column. They're mounted to the steering column, not the wheel itself, which means when you turn the wheel, the paddles stay in one place, which is the traditional race car layout. And when you put it in a production car, yes, it's a bit more confusing and takes a bit of getting used to, but it makes the driver feel a little bit more special because it feels just a little bit more like they're driving an actual race car. Moving up from the gear selector, you have some traditional manual buttons to operate your automatic climate control, which I like to see. That's very nice. And up from that, you have what you'd expect for a 10-year-old FCA infotainment system. And I'm sure this infotainment system is not bespoke to the Maserati. I'm sure it's in a lot of other FCA products, but it's here and it's fine. There's not that much to talk about. You can operate your climate in a sub-menu. If you want to do that to yourself, I'd recommend no. There's also navigation. You can connect your phone via Bluetooth, and it has this very well executed backup camera. As you can see, I put it into reverse and it's upside down. This backup camera is really a good metaphor for the rest of the Ghibli. It's not good. You have two analog gauges which look nice and beautiful, and they have the Maserati Trident in the middle just to remind yourself that you are in a Ghibli, not a Dodge Charger SXT. You might need to look at those Maserati Tridents to remind yourself that you're actually driving a Maserati and not something far worse, which is what it feels like. And then going on interior quality, I can feel lots of cheap plastic easily within range of my hands. I don't have to look or feel around for it. I mean, down below this center console, it's plastic, 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 pretty much everywhere you look and feel. And when they made this car, they were probably desperately hoping that people wouldn't be touching here, but it is pretty easy to reach. And the best part of this interior by country mile is this clock right here. You have an analog clock here mounted in the top of the dashboard, right in the center above the infotainment screen, and it looks like the sort of thing that I would be considering for purchase for $5 at a local 7-Eleven, which means it is not very nice at all. It's quite poor. And another thing that is quite poor, one more thing while we're inside the interior, is the driving position, which out of every car I've reviewed on Topher Parker Cars is the worst driving position I've ever experienced. Maybe it's just an issue with this car. Maybe it's an issue with my genetics being as tall as I am, but in order for me to be comfortable holding the steering wheel in the driving position that I like, I either have to have the seat moved so high up that my head is touching the ceiling constantly, or I just have to accept the fact that I'm holding the steering wheel all the way up here like one of those dudes riding those Harley Davidson with those wide handles. You know, they're driving along like this. That's what it feels like, because this steering wheel will not move even close to far down enough for me to be comfortable. This is your full range in terms of tilting the steering wheel, which is about an inch. It needs to go probably 4 inches downwards, even more, for me to be comfortable. This steering wheel just mounts way too high for me to be comfortable. And again, it's either I hold the steering wheel up here, which is uncomfortable, or I sit so high up that my head is constantly touching the roof. It is the worst driving position that I have ever experienced in any car. And maybe again, it's just me, maybe it's the car, but if you're tall, I would avoid this car. If you have a brain, I would avoid this car. So with that being said, let's have a look at the engine real quick. This is where I would say things get a little bit better. This is a 3-liter V6 that is developed in a joint partnership with Ferrari. Twin turbocharged, and it developed 404 brake horsepower, which is a healthy number, and it should make for a relatively decent and sporty driving experience. But if you wanted more, you could step up to the Ghibli Trofeo, which had a twin turbo 3.8 liter V8 that developed more than 500 horsepower. But what we have here is what would become the mid-level trim, which has an engine block that was developed by Chrysler, but apparently it's a Ferrari-derived V6 engine, which is nice. I guess it's nice to have one Ferrari thing in here. There's not that much about this car that screams Ferrari, and if there was, that would be a bad thing for Ferrari. And I'm sure you'll be opening the hood a lot. So with that being said, let's have a listen to this V6, take this car out for a drive, and see if it can redeem itself with the driving experience. You can tell I've made it in life because I am enjoying my tea in my Maserati. Putting aside the fact that with every foot that I drive, it loses another $85 in value, but that's fine. It doesn't matter because I am in a very comfortable driving position. Let me just move my steering wheel down a little bit. Oh no, that's right. It's got a full tilting range of a ½ an inch, which is nice. So it's not off to a great start when the driving position is terrible. But okay, they let Ferrari work with them on the engine, and that's the most important thing. The way this engine behaves, it definitely feels Italian in the sense that it's a bit loud, it's a bit zesty, it's got a bit of a character to it, which is what you want out of a Maserati. You want it to make you feel special as you drive along. You don't want to be driving along thinking about how much money you would have saved if you'd gotten a BMW 5 Series whilst enjoying sticking your entire forearm in this panel gap right here. Let's see where this car hopefully will make some good on itself. So we've got it in manual mode now. Oh, baby! That doesn't feel like 400 horsepower, but it felt pretty good, especially with these column-mounted shift paddles. They feel amazing. You can just bang through shifts. They're always in the same place, which, yeah, can take a bit of getting used to. Might be a bit frustrating, but it makes it feel a little bit more special. And as I drive this car along, I forget about the awful interior. I forget about the bad execution of this shift lever. You forget about the fact that you paid 100 grand for it and now it's worth 15. You forget about all of that because it drives so well. I will say the steering is dead though. Yeah, I don't think a BMW 5 Series from 2014 is gonna stir up the emotions when you drive it as well as the Ghibli does. Again, this is more of a mid-range model. This is the mid-range SQ4 model, which is kind of the one you want because it's all-wheel drive and it's a bit more power, but it's a little bit less expensive, I dare say, than the Trofeo. And 400 horsepower isn't a ton, and it certainly doesn't feel very fast. Honestly, it's a bit disappointing there as well. When I open it up, it's just, it doesn't feel that fast, but it's very nice to drive. And especially when you're playing around with these shift paddles, that's what you got to do all of the time when you're driving this car. If you're not using these shift paddles, then you'll start to notice all of the things about this car that make it bad. But if you just focus on the way it drives, then it's all right. But one more good thing, one more redeeming thing about the Ghibli is the ride quality is nice. I have it in sport mode right now. I can take it out of sport mode, and you get some feedback through the bumps in the road. As you can see, the camera's shaking a little bit, but I was not expecting this car to be half this comfortable. It is very impressive the way this car just soaks up the bumps in the roads. I mean, you could buy one of these and daily drive it totally fine, as long as its Maserati-ness doesn't make itself apparent. So the ride comfort is there where you wouldn't expect it. The handling is pretty good, and once again, the way it just stirs up the emotions and gets you to smile when you open it up, man, it does have that Italian flair that you would want from a Maserati. And given this was more of an entry-level model, when it came to the execution of the driving experience and the feel, they exceeded there. While everything about it static is a total disaster, a complete letdown, the interior is unacceptable, and the driving position is the worst I've ever experienced in a sedan. When you get it out on the road, it somewhat makes up for it in engagement and fun and smiles per gallon. It's a fun car to drive. It's very enjoyable. Does that excuse its problems that it has elsewhere? I would argue not quite. So I hope everyone liked this video. Like, subscribe, do all the normal YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.